Hey everybody, this is Teja Namander, host of the Frontier Podcast. Today we've got an awesome episode with CEO Samantha John, who runs a company called Get Hopscotch. And Hopscotch's mission is to create a programming environment that lets kids explore powerful ideas while making real software. So think about it like the next evolution for Scratch, if you've ever used that to learn programming. It's a really fun conversation, learned a lot, and sort of most interestingly, Samantha moved her company from New York City to Puerto Rico. And so she's got a lot of learnings to share with us, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure you guys will too. Take care. Thanks for doing this, Samantha. I'm super excited that we were able to get you on.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, hey, so congrats on the Shark Tank appearance and the successful raise from Mark Cuban. That's
Thank you.
That's really fantastic. And you've done like a number of interviews, and I'm sure everybody in your friend circle has asked, like, how did that happen? How'd it go? We could talk about that if you want. Do you want to talk about that? Is that still exciting for you?
Yeah, we can talk about it. I can tell you a little bit of the story. You know, I had been looking to do more publicity. So I kind of had my ears open, my ears to the ground, like, what can we do to get our name out there more? And I actually got a LinkedIn message from a casting producer from Shark Tank. I don't usually respond to random LinkedIn messages, and I wasn't even totally sure this person was for real, but it seemed as if it fit the type of opportunity I was looking for. So I figured I would just answer, and I ended up talking to the casting producer, and he convinced me to submit an audition tape. Like, he didn't just put me on Shark Tank. I still had to do a whole audition tape. He helped me out a little bit in making the video. And then they didn't really ever accept me. They just kind of kept saying, you haven't been kicked out yet. You're still in the running to be on Shark Tank. And then, by the way, you know, it was COVID, so everything was so much more complicated. But I got the message in April and filmed Shark Tank in September, and then it aired in February. So to give you a sense of the timeline, it was almost a year.
Wow. Did you think the LinkedIn message was fake at first?
I kind of thought it was fake at first. I kind of think all LinkedIn messages are fake.
They mostly are, I think. And so did you get an opportunity to meet other folks who were on the show, or just the Sharks?
So kind of. There was a waiting room beforehand where they did a few people at the same time. And there were, I think, 3 other companies in the waiting room with me. So we all practiced our pitches to each other.
That's cool.
And at that point, you work with a producer, they help you out with your pitch a little bit, and you've practiced it a lot at that point. You know every word of that pitch, but we all did our pitches for each other, which was pretty fun. And then it was cool to see those people's shows air and be like,
yeah,
oh, I saw that.
That's so cool. So do you have a good sense of the line of questioning, or is it sort of like you kind of know and whatever they feel like asking, they'll ask?
Yeah, whatever they feel like asking, they'll ask. They're not crazy people though. So what I ended up doing is I gave my pitch to a bunch of friends and family and investors. And then I just asked them to pretend they were sharks and ask me questions after the pitch, which was a really good strategy because I was so bad at answering the questions. I spent about a little over a week before Shark Tank doing this. And probably for the first 5 days, I sucked. It was only probably a day or two before the show filmed that I finally was pretty confident in how I wanted to answer things and felt as if I was able to get across what I wanted to get across.
So I remember, this is like many years ago, when I sort of like Googled like how to raise money. There was like a local incubator in town in Nashville, and I just ended up going down there, and one thing led to another, and we ended up like graduating from this incubator. But I had never pitched the business before. You know, they sort of prepare you to do this. Yeah. And so my mom was there, and you know, you're going to go present in front of a large crowd. So I remember just like shotgunning like my mom didn't know what a shotgun of a beer was, but I was like, I need a way to take the edge off, because I'm gonna go and talk about this concept that's now a business in front of hundreds of people, you know. And
how old were you?
Man, I was like 22. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. This is many, many years ago. And so I remember that. I'm sure it was nerve-wracking, but I mean, from what I could see, you handled yourself really well. And I liked Barbara's answer. Like, you're so impressive, but I'm not investing. It's like, what?
Barbara, I thought, was trying to trip me up a little bit. She asked me the question, you look scared. Are you scared? And I just, in my mind, I was like, come on.
Yeah, it's like, no shit, of course.
But Mark Cuban is an investor and he's been really awesome. He gave an interview where he said he never takes calls. He takes maybe one call a month.
Yeah.
He does everything over email and he's so responsive on email. He answers every email within probably 10 minutes. It's really amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so cool. So we should probably actually talk about what Hopscotch is and what your company does.
Of course. So Hopscotch is a coding tool for kids. And what that means is kids use Hopscotch to first learn how to code. And we make that really easy. You don't have to type anything. It's built for iPads and iPhones. Everything is touchscreen. Everything is drag and drop. So it's smooth and simple and gets rid of a lot of the hurdles to programming that you would face in a lot of other environments, whether it's setting up your development environment or downloading the programming language or learning the syntax, or even just getting your program to run. All of those things we've made really easy. And kids then immediately jump into the actual programming part of programming and actual making stuff. They make games, they make apps, they make animations, simulations, really anything you can imagine, they make. And once they're done, they can share it with our community. So they make something really cool. They make a really fun game. They make a really interesting animation. They make a weird simulation, and then they can share it with hundreds of thousands of kids. So they see that there's actually an audience of people who care about what they're making, which is super powerful and a huge driver of what kids love about Hopscotch. And the latest thing we're introducing is an in-game currency called seeds that you can use to buy various things in Hopscotch, including now kids are able to sell stuff inside their Hopscotch projects for seeds to earn currency. And eventually where we want to go with that is payouts for real money so that kids can look at Hopscotch and say, okay, this is cool. I'm going to learn how to code. I'm going to make something cool. And I'm actually going to be a real programmer because someone will pay me to program.
That's so cool. That's awesome. What age cohort is the ideal Hopscotch user?
It's interesting because what we've seen is, and I think this is true for a lot of creative tools, it kind of adjusts to fit where you are. So most people start when they're between 9 to 11 and they're learning the basics. They're doing very simple things, but still having a lot of fun. And then they get hooked. We've been around for a little bit. We launched the app in 2013. And there's still people using the app who started when they were 10 years old in 2013. And now they're 18, 19. You know, it's pretty common that our best users have been using it for at least 4 or 5 years. And it's something that kids stick with and the platform kind of grows with them, both because we've improved the platform since we launched it and just because programming just has an extremely, extremely high ceiling. And that's probably my favorite thing about Hopscotch is just seeing the journey that these incredibly creative, brilliant kids are on.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, so 10 years old, I think that's third grade, right?
Third, fourth grade is about the youngest where they're successful. Fifth graders do really well. It's interesting because I think it's good for those ages because they are young enough where the stuff they can make on Hopscotch off the bat feels really cool.
Yeah.
But they're old enough that they have the focus to keep working on something and keep improving it. And you do need some sort of ability to focus to program and an ability to read. So for 6 and 7-year-olds, they're a little bit too scattered and they can't read quite well enough. So they have fun with it. They like playing the games. They like doing it with their parents, but they're not quite ready to sit down and build something from start to finish.
What's the way that parents can get involved in supporting their kids' use of Hopscotch?
What I see a lot is the parent is just kind of there to answer questions. And often the parent doesn't actually know the answer to the question, but usually the kids like to work on it on their own, but then have a parent nearby when they feel stuck or confused. I think a lot of times the parent is kind of the rubber duck. The kid just needs to talk something through.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, I think that parallels what happens with like homework. You know, I sort of, especially if you're studying, I don't know, my parents are immigrants. So at a young age, my parents were unable to help me with my homework. You just needed to talk at them for a little bit.
Yeah.
And get the answer. Yeah, that's cool. So I guess this would kind of replace like Scratch maybe in computer science classes.
Yeah, for sure. I would say Scratch is very comparable, and I love Scratch. I think they've done so much for kids coding and kind of putting out the idea that this can be accessible. And I think they've done a lot of things right, but obviously I think Hopscotch is better.
Yeah, totally. I mean, products have life cycles, and this you've learned from them.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think something that's really interesting is that what we found is that kids actually do really love to be able to make things that they can play on their phone and tablet. And that's kind of what they think of as their computer. And especially the kids in the kind of middle school age range, I think as they get older, and this is something we want to eventually address, is start to build for more platforms, especially web, because I think that is a really good tool for the older kids. As they grow into Hopscotch, they're getting better at typing. They want to kind of get more performance. You can do things very fast once you get good at typing. You can have keyboard shortcuts and all that. But for starting out, it's so much more delightful to be able to do something on a touch screen. And if you're trying to do drag and drop on a desktop, it kind of hurts your hand after a while.
Yeah, I'm sure you've made a lot of decks, and just dragging and dropping PowerPoint decks or Keynote decks is just, I don't know, it's mind-numbing and hard on the hands, as you said. Yeah. That's cool. Okay. So how did you sort of conceive of Hopscotch? I know you studied applied mathematics. Were you looking for a way to teach somebody in your family how to program, or?
I started Hopscotch because I was looking for a way to teach my younger self how to program.
I see. Okay, cool.
I started pretty late. I didn't really do programming in college. I had this sense that it was something more for boys. It didn't feel as if it was aimed for me. I actually went to engineering school where I studied applied math and started out and just said, okay, no, computer science, that's not my major. That's the first one I eliminated.
Wow. Why?
I was very frustrated with my computer at that time.
Yeah, that doesn't end. I mean, I still don't know how to use a computer.
My computer right now, I spilled water on it the other day, and it has like a giant map of Greenland watermark on my screen. Looking at you through. I'm still terrible with computers. And it was very interesting to me when I found out about programming and got really into it and started to love it, that was something that could be separated from being good at computers and being good at machines, which I most certainly was not, and still am not.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I remember like I had an exchange with our head of engineering, and I said something like, I know how to use a computer. And he was like, do you though? I'm like, probably not actually. Different windows up in your terminal. Like, I don't, so yeah. How did you find your way to applied math? Your mom was a scientist. Did you have an interest as a kid in science and math, or? A
lot of things of this nature, I think, sometimes happen for not super great reasons, or maybe they are great reasons. I applied to, 7 colleges or something, which seemed like a lot at the time. Maybe now it's not a lot anymore. And I tried to optimize for having something different at each college. So I only applied to one engineering school, which was Columbia University in New York. I think because I thought Columbia seemed to be very liberal arts leaning. So I knew I was good at science and math. And then I didn't know what engineering was, but I thought it was something I should investigate. So I thought that by choosing engineering at the more liberal arts leaning school, that would be a good mix somehow. And then what happened is I just visited the schools I got into. And I remember it was called Days on Campus. It was the spring of my senior year of high school. And I visited Columbia, and the engineering school was probably only about 30% women. But every single girl I met at Days on Campus was so cool and smart. They were all my people. And I'm actually still very, very close friends. My best friend from college was someone I met at that Days on Campus event. And wow. So I met all these people, and I was like, oh, these are the people I want to be friends with. These are the girls I want to know. And that was basically what made the decision for me, more so than anything super scientific. It was kind of a gut call based on the people I met.
Yeah. So are you from New York?
I grew up in Detroit and then went to New York for college in 2005. And then I stayed just because I love New York. I stayed from 2005 to 2020. And then mid-pandemic, I moved to Puerto Rico. So Shark Tank was filming, and I used that as a date to move out of New York. I stayed with my parents for a couple months and then moved to Puerto Rico. And that's where I'm calling in from right now. I'm in San Juan.
Wow. Okay, that's a way different answer than I had anticipated. So I was going to ask you, like, where in New York do you get that kind of sunlight? Like, that's incredible.
No, you don't.
Yeah, usually there's like a building right next to you. That's so cool. So, do you have any friends there, or you just like?
Yeah. It was also for the people. A friend of mine, not even a very close friend at the time. Now she's a very close friend. She rented a 7-bedroom house in San Juan and got all her friends to move in.
That's so cool.
I'm living in a 7-bedroom house right now.
Wow.
It's a giant COVID pod. I actually just got vaccinated, so it doesn't even need to be a pod anymore. But I was feeling very lonely in New York.
Yeah.
Pandemic. Actually the summer wasn't bad. The summer was pretty fun when you could do everything outside. But I also, for various reasons, felt that I needed to try living in another city. Even if I eventually end up in New York, I wanted to try something new and had been originally planning to move to Paris, but that didn't work out due to the pandemic.
Totally. I mean, it's killed basically everybody's trip plans and, okay, so that's interesting. So I assume everybody's working remotely in the house.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Are you the only entrepreneur, or are there other?
Of the 8 of us, 6 of us are startup founders.
Wow.
Yeah. One works at kind of a VC/incubator thing. And the last person was like an early employee at a startup. So it's like real world startup edition or something.
Do you like that, or does that get troubling? And before you answer, I'll share my own bias with this question. So I lived in San Francisco for a year. Like, the fund that we first raised from just had like an apartment out there. And I was like, let's just go. So my, co-founders and I, we went out there. And man, I did not enjoy being around other startup founders personally. I was like, I want to meet different people from different backgrounds, and I just was like, I'm spending my life's energy working on a website, like, and everybody else's too. I want to meet other interesting people. So that's how I felt. But I think as I've gotten older and maybe more mature, I appreciate people who are going through the same journey. So I'm curious how you feel about it.
I have very similar feelings about San Francisco, I will say. It's such an industry town, and it can be it's hard for me at least to get my head out of that bubble. And it's the startup thing, but it's also the raising money thing. And it's hard not to compare yourself to everyone all the time. And
totally.
Feel as if you are falling short.
Totally. Oh yeah. Some company just started a year ago. They're at $1 billion valuation already. And you're like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I not good? Like, I've been working on this for 6 years. That's my internal. I didn't mean to turn this into a session, but that's my internal monologue.
I do that all the time. I think for me, and this is something that has actually been kind of a recent realization. When I can come back to the mission of what we're working on, that definitely reinvigorates me. And that reminds me, this is why I'm not an investment banker, because I'm trying to change the world, and spending 9 years trying to change the world is really not very much time in the grand scheme of things. And I'm happy to spend more than that if it works. So
I think it's already working.
It is. And one of my favorite things to see is that there's these kids who didn't see themselves as programmers and didn't think of this as something that they would want to try, or, wouldn't have come through the traditional paths. And something that I just think it's important is that Hopscotch feels very welcoming to girls. And there was a little bit of effort into it, but I mean, mostly it was just my co-founder and I are both women, and we used our own taste to decide what was cool and what wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think that the opposite bias exists as well for a lot of companies or languages or tools that are started by men that, especially for kids, can feel very gendered and turn off girls or turn off people who maybe don't always see themselves as technical. And Hopscotch feels, in my opinion, much more creative, much more as if it's a tool that anyone could learn. And if you're a girl, you might think that this is something you could do or something that's for you. And seeing those people get on Hopscotch and learn to code and start making really interesting and weird and creative things that I never would have thought of, and having that content that they make or having that software that they make out in the world, that software that just wouldn't have existed without Hopscotch, and seeing these people go on a journey that wouldn't have existed without Hopscotch, that is very powerful to see.
Yeah, and like in some ways, you're making the sort of future arrive faster by enabling people to code.
Really making the future arrive in a slightly better direction.
True. Yeah, we can hope. So, I'm curious, like, what are some metrics that you guys track around information uptake or learning how to code? That's
literally $1 trillion question. It's so hard. We don't have a good answer. And I see a lot of people who do education tools or education apps And there are things that are easy to track, such as how many lessons did you do? Or let's make some puzzles. How many puzzles did you solve? How difficult did the puzzles get? And the more you can constrain the problem, the easier it is to measure. The problem is the more you constrain the problem, the less interesting educationally it is. So if you're really trying to open people up and have them learn by doing and creating and let them explore different avenues, think about just yourself when you learn something new. How do you even know that you learned it? A lot of times you don't. I'm constantly trying to figure out, do I actually know that? Oh, I don't know. Yep. So for us as a platform where we're not even interacting with you to figure out how much you've learned, it feels very audacious for us to say, we know how much you've learned or didn't learn. That said, people, when they're learning, love to have someone tell them that they're learning. So it's a tension that we face. And we have a lot of tutorials. So we do a lot of tutorials as videos that you follow along, and started to kind of arrange those into a path. So you do have progress through all the different videos to learn hopscotch. And that's somewhat self-administered progress, where we tell you that you finished the video, but you could go back and do it again if you wanted. You can skip around if you want, but we do kind of tell you the order, and you can see that now I've done, the first module of hopscotch and I'm halfway through the second.
That's cool. So I guess, if I were to get my nephew to do hopscotch, I'm trying to think about how I can pitch it to him, because he's fairly sure he wants to go into computer science.
Oh, cool.
He's playing with stuff online and trying to kind of build some applications himself. And
oh, that's awesome. How old is your nephew?
He's 12. So
12?
Yeah. And so, in Indian families, when you're you come out of the womb and your parents are all right, listen, you will be an anesthesiologist. And if you can't do that, then you're going to be this other thing, so who knows? He may go to school and be listen, I want to go teach yoga.
Yeah, totally. I think that especially, if he wants to make apps, there is a very cool property of hopscotch projects that they play on your phone and your iPad, and all the things that come with it. You can use accelerometer and you can use multi-touch, and they're basically iPhone and iPad games that you're making, which from what I've seen from kids, if you're hey, you can make a game like you see in the App Store, they're what? Sign me up. I think, yes, I want that.
Yeah, that's so true. Cool. Okay. After this, I will pitch it to him.
Getting customers one podcast interview at a time.
I think that there are probably a lot of engineers who want to kind of gently expose their kids.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of engineers, at least in my experience, they do really enjoy what they do. And they're perplexed why no one else enjoys it. They're no, this is so cool. Why can't you? You should try it. It's going to be so awesome. And then everyone else sees programming and it just feels too hard, or the hill is too high to get over. So hopscotch, I think, lets you show that thing as an engineer. It lets you show your kid that thing that you love and get them there so much faster, without also showing them that thing that frustrates the heck out of you every day.
Oh yeah. Spending 2 days to set up your environment. So cool. So, I'm curious about this. Do you think that maybe in 20 years, everybody will know how to code? I think that's what a lot of the tech literati seem to be pointing to, but I don't know if everybody does want to code. So I'm curious how you think about that.
So I think something that's interesting is, first of all, what does it even mean to learn to code? And that's changed over time. So if you look at the history of programmers, it is a history of the grumpy older generation telling the new generation that their fancy new tool is not programming. So there were the hardware programmers, and they were doing their thing, and then they got assembly language, and the young people were programming in assembly, and the hardware people were this is nonsense. This isn't real. And then people started writing, I think probably one level up was Fortran over assembly. And the assembly people were that's not real programming. What are you doing? On and on and on up the abstraction ladder. But of course, they were all doing real programming. The way I like to think about it is making the tool fit the human rather than trying to make the human fit the tool. And you see this in violins and string instruments. I used to play violin when I was a kid, and I started with a quarter-size violin, which is a really tiny violin for a little kid. And it's not really any different than a regular-size violin. It just fits you. And then as you grow larger, you get a bigger and bigger violin. And I always thought that was really cool that the instrument makers were not oh, okay, you have to wait until you're big to get good at violin, because, there's all these things you need. They're like, oh no, you can actually start getting good immediately as long as we just adjust the tool a little bit so that it fits your body. And my hope is that we will kind of continue to adjust and refine the programming tools so that they fit humans better rather than fitting computers better, which is often, I think, kind of the way they go, that people design the tools for the computers rather than for the humans who are going to use it.
Wow. That's powerful. And it's so true. Yeah, that's really compelling. So if you had to sum up Hopscotch's mission, what would you say it is?
Our mission is to teach kids about the powerful ideas of computing while letting them make real software.
Awesome. All right, Samantha, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. This is so fun.
Hey, thanks for checking out the Frontier podcast, produced by gun.io. We're the hiring platform companies use to find the best talent in software development. If you enjoyed the show and want to learn more about how to hire or work with us, head over to gun.io to get in touch.